The first time I saw my pregnant wife cry on Christmas Eve, I thought she was scared of losing me, but then I realized she was only afraid the plan would fail. Snow was falling hard outside the mansion windows, soft white flakes drifting past the glass like the whole world had decided to stay quiet and watch. Inside, the dining room glowed with candlelight, gold ornaments, crystal glasses, and a 12-foot Christmas tree standing near the staircase like something from a magazine cover. Madison sat across from me in a cream-colored dress, one hand resting on her stomach, the other trembling over a stack of legal papers placed beside her untouched dinner plate. Her mother, Patricia Whitmore, stood at the head of the table with a champagne flute in her hand and that polished smile she wore whenever she thought she had won. Brandon Hayes leaned against the fireplace, too comfortable for a guest, too pleased for a man who claimed he was only there to support an old friend. The rest of her family sat around the table pretending this was a holiday gathering and not an execution wrapped in ribbon. I could smell roasted turkey, cinnamon, pine needles, and something colder underneath it all, the clean, sharp scent of people waiting for a man to break. Madison looked at me once, her eyes wet, her lips pressed together like she wanted me to believe this hurt her more than it hurt me. Then she signed. The pen moved across the paper with a small scratching sound. Almost nothing, but in that room it landed like a door locking from the outside. Patricia exhaled as if she had been holding her breath for years. Brandon lowered his eyes to hide a smile and failed. Someone near the end of the table gave a quiet little laugh. Then another joined in, and soon the sound traveled through the room, soft at first, then warmer, uglier, spreading around the candles like smoke. They thought I had just watched my marriage end. They thought I had just watched my child, my home, and my future slide across a mahogany table into their hands. Patricia tapped the papers with one manicured finger and said, "Ethan, this is the cleanest way. No scene. No embarrassment. Madison needs peace, and, frankly, this house needs dignity again." Brandon lifted his glass toward me, his smile thin as a paper cut. "She will be taken care of, man. That is what matters now." I looked at Madison, waiting for even one word that sounded like the woman I married. She did not defend me. She did not apologize. She only wiped one tear from her cheek and whispered, "Please do not make this harder." That was the moment something inside me went still. Not angry, not loud, just still, the way a lake goes flat before the ice takes it. I folded my napkin, placed it beside the plate, and let the laughter finish. They wanted a begging husband. They wanted raised voices, shaking hands, a man desperate enough to sign anything just to stay near the life he had built. Instead, I looked past them at the garland wrapped around the staircase, at the house they kept calling theirs, at the walls I had paid to save before most of them even knew they were losing it. Then I said, calm enough for every person at that table to hear me, "Funny thing about houses. People always talk about who belongs inside them, but they forget to ask who owns the walls." For 3 seconds, nobody moved. The room held its breath around me, candle flames trembling in their glass cups, the silverware catching little flashes of gold from the chandelier overhead. Patricia's smile tightened first. She was the kind of woman who believed silence belonged to people beneath her, so when I gave her silence instead of panic, it bothered her more than shouting ever could. Brandon gave a short laugh and set his champagne on the mantel. "Come on, Ethan," he said, using my name like a hand on my shoulder that had not earned the right to touch me. "Let us not turn this into a property lecture. Patricia has been more than generous. Madison needs calm right now. The baby needs calm." That was clever. Bring up the baby. Make every word I said sound selfish before I even said it. Madison lowered her eyes to the papers, her fingers resting over her stomach again, and for a moment I saw the girl I married hiding somewhere behind the woman they had coached. I almost reached for that memory. Almost. Then Patricia slid the signed packet across the table toward me with 2 fingers, as if the paper itself might dirty her hand if it stayed near me too long. "You will sign here," she said. "You will vacate the property by midnight. Temporary lodging has been arranged at the Hampton Inn off Route 9. Your personal items can be collected later under supervision." The words were polished, practiced, cold enough to frost the windows from the inside. Someone at the far end of the table muttered that it was better this way. Another said Madison deserved a fresh start. Fresh start. I looked around at the garland, the family portraits, the antique clock in the hall, The marble floor they loved stepping across like it proved something about them. They were not talking about a marriage anymore. They were rearranging furniture in a life they thought belonged to them. I took the packet and did not open it. The paper felt warm from Madison's hand. That detail bothered me more than I expected. She had held it. She had read enough of it to know what they wanted from me. She had still signed. Brandon pushed away from the fireplace and walked behind Madison's chair, standing close enough to look protective, far enough to pretend he was not enjoying himself. "We are all adults here," he said. "Nobody wants to humiliate you." A quiet laugh escaped Patricia before she could stop it. That told the truth better than his sentence did. I looked at him, then at her, then at Madison. "Is that what this is?" I asked. "Not humiliation?" Madison's chin trembled. "Ethan, please." My voice stayed level. "Please what? Please sign away my rights. Please leave the house before dessert. Please let your former boyfriend explain dignity to me in my own dining room." The word former landed harder than I meant it to. Brandon's jaw shifted. Patricia set her glass down with a clean little click. "This is exactly why we did it tonight," she said. "You become emotional, Ethan. You make things uncomfortable. Madison cannot live under that kind of pressure." I almost smiled then, not because it was funny, but because some lies are so perfectly shaped they begin to admire themselves. Emotional. That was the label they needed for me. If I objected, I was unstable. If I stayed quiet, I was guilty. If I left, I was abandoning my pregnant wife. If I remained, I was refusing to move on. They had built a hallway with no doors and expected me to thank them for the walls. The attorney sitting near Patricia, a narrow man named Lewis Crane, cleared his throat and opened a leather folder. "Mr. Caldwell, the document reflects a voluntary separation arrangement and acknowledgement that Mrs. Caldwell will remain in the marital residence during the pending proceedings." I glanced at him. "You drafted this?" He adjusted his glasses. "I reviewed it on behalf of Mrs. Caldwell and her family." That was not an answer, but it was useful. I nodded once and looked back at Patricia. "Midnight, you said?" Her face brightened, thinking the question meant surrender. "Yes. A clean break is best." Outside, snow brushed against the tall windows like fingertips. The tree lights blinked red, gold, patient as a warning. I finally opened the packet, turned past the first page, and saw exactly what I expected to see. My signature line waited under a paragraph filled with careful words and careless assumptions. I reached into my jacket, removed my own pen, and placed it on the table beside their papers. Madison watched it like it was a match dropped near gasoline. Then I leaned back in my chair and said, "I will not be signing that." Brandon laughed again, louder this time. Patricia's eyes hardened. "Ethan, do not embarrass yourself." I folded my hands and looked at every person who had laughed at me under my own roof. I am not the one who should be worried about embarrassment tonight. Patricia leaned back as if I had spilled something on the tablecloth. "Not signing," she repeated, slow and bright. The way people speak when they want a room to agree with them before the sentence ends. "Ethan, you do understand this is not a negotiation." I looked at her hands, perfect rings, perfect nails, fingers resting on the edge of a table she had never paid to polish. That was Patricia Whitmore in one image. Always touching things like ownership was a matter of confidence. Mr. Crane adjusted the papers in front of him and tried to recover the room. "Mr. Caldwell, refusal to cooperate may complicate the proceedings." I nodded. Complications have a way of showing who prepared and who only rehearsed. Brandon snorted, but it came out weaker than before. Madison finally looked up at me. Her face was pale in the candlelight, beautiful in the careful way that had once made me forget entire rooms. "Ethan," she said, "I know this hurts. I really do. But you have to think about what is best for everyone." Everyone. That word sat there wearing perfume and pretending it was kindness. I remembered the first time she said something like that. We were 28, eating takeout on the floor of my old rental in Burlington because I had sold the couch to make payroll for a crew of 4 men. She had laughed then, barefoot in an oversized college sweatshirt, dipping fries into a paper cup of ketchup, telling me she did not care if I ever became rich as long as I stayed honest. Back then, honesty was enough for her. Back then, a man with sawdust in his hair and a truck with 200,000 miles still looked like a future. I did not come from marble floors or family portraits painted by people who charged more than my first truck cost. I came from a split-level house outside Montpelier where the pipes froze twice a winter And my father taught me that a man should know how to fix the things he depended on. By 16, I could frame a wall, patch a roof, replace a breaker, and read a property listing the way other kids read box scores. By 22, I had my first foreclosure. 800 square feet, bad wiring, cracked foundation, raccoons in the attic, and a bank officer who looked at me like I was buying a coffin. I slept on plywood for 6 months while I brought that place back from the dead. Every paycheck went into lumber, permits, insulation, nails, coffee, and gas. I learned quickly that houses have memories. They remember neglect. They remember care. They remember who shows up when the rain gets in. One house became two. Two became six. I started Caldwell Restoration with a used trailer, a rented storage unit, and a list of contractors who trusted my handshake because my checks cleared on Fridays. I was never loud about money. Loud. Money attracts loud people, and I had seen what loud people did to quiet things. By the time I met Madison at a charity auction in Stowe, I already owned more than she knew, but she liked the version of me who arrived in work boots and helped a waiter carry folding chairs to the kitchen. She said I was different from the men her mother invited to dinner. Grounded, she called me. Real. For years, I believed that was why she loved me. Maybe it was, for a while. Maybe love can be real and still not survive the first taste of status. Patricia never understood me. She saw the truck, the plain suits, the hands with scars from old work, and decided I was a useful man, not an important one. Brandon understood even less. He saw Madison beside me and thought I had gotten lucky. They all did. That was their first mistake. Their second was assuming a man who does not talk about what he owns must not own anything worth discussing. I came back to the room slowly, to the candlelight and the signed papers, and Madison watching me like she was waiting for the old Ethan to fold. I picked up my water glass, took one sip, and set it down without a sound. Then I looked at Mr. Crane and said, "Before you explain cooperation to me again, you may want to ask your client one simple question." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "And what question is that?" I turned toward the tall windows, where the snow kept falling over the dark lawn I had saved from foreclosure 7 years earlier. Ask her why she scheduled a legal signing inside a house she never verified she owned. The question did not land like a shout. It landed like a hairline crack running across glass, thin at first, almost invisible, but everyone in that dining room felt it spread. Mr. Crane stopped moving. His thumb rested on the corner of the document, frozen halfway through straightening it. Patricia stared at me as if I had spoken in a language she refused to learn. Brandon looked toward the windows, then back at me, his smile bending at the edges. Madison did not speak. That was how I knew the words had found the right place. 7 years earlier, Whitmore House was not glowing with Christmas lights. It was dark, cold, and almost empty, sitting at the end of a private road outside Manchester, Vermont, with 12 acres of snow-covered grounds and a roofline beautiful enough to make people ignore the rot underneath. The bank had already filed notices. Contractors had walked through, taken photographs, and walked back out shaking their heads. Too expensive, too risky, too much history and not enough profit. Patricia told everyone the family was simply renovating. That was her gift, turning collapse into vocabulary. The truth was uglier. The property taxes were late. The east wing had water damage. The old heating system was failing. The stone terrace had shifted almost 4 inches after a bad freeze. The place looked grand from the driveway and exhausted everywhere else. I remember standing in the foyer the first time, my breath turning white in the air, flashlight beam moving over cracked plaster, warped floorboards, and a chandelier wrapped in dust like a forgotten crown. Madison had walked beside me in a wool coat, quiet for once. She touched the banister and said, "My grandmother used to decorate this place for Christmas. I thought it was the most beautiful house in the world." Her voice had gone soft in a way I rarely heard around her mother. Not proud, not polished, just honest. And that was all it took. I did not buy the mansion because Patricia deserved saving. I did not buy it because the Whitmore name impressed me. I bought it because my wife looked at a dying house and saw her childhood trying to breathe. The purchase had to be clean, quiet, and protected. My attorney set up Caldwell Heritage Trust, then a limited liability company underneath it to handle restoration, taxes, insurance, vendors, and long-term ownership. That was not secrecy for drama. That was structure. Real estate can feed a family or swallow one whole if a man gets careless. I had learned that by watching better builders lose everything because they confused love with paperwork. So I paid the arrears, negotiated with the bank, settled the contractor liens, and put a crew on the property before the first hard frost. For 18 months, that house became my second heartbeat. I was there. At 5 in the morning with coffee in a paper cup, walking rooms with plumbers, electricians, masons, roofers, inspectors. We replaced 86 windows, repaired 3 chimneys, rebuilt the terrace, upgraded the heating system, rewired every floor, restored the library shelves by hand, and saved the grand staircase board by board. I kept the old bones where I could and replaced only what time had ruined. Madison came by some weekends, wrapped in a scarf, smiling like I had returned a piece of her family to her. Patricia came after the work was done and immediately began calling it our house again. I let her. That was my mistake. Not the trust. Not the documents. Not the quiet ownership. My mistake was believing gratitude did not need to be spoken to remain alive. Back in the dining room, the same staircase gleamed beyond Patricia's shoulder. The same chandelier poured light over the table. The same house I had rescued stood around us while they tried to use it as a weapon against me. I looked at Madison, and for 1 second, I wanted her to remember standing in that frozen foyer with me. I wanted her to remember the man who saved the place she loved before her mother could turn it into a stage. But her eyes dropped to the papers, and the last soft part of me understood. Some people do not forget what you did for them. They simply decide it is more convenient if everyone else does. Pregnancy should have made our house warmer. That is what I told myself at first. I thought the news would pull Madison and me back toward the same center, the way a porch light pulls you home through heavy snow. For a few weeks, it almost did. She showed me the first ultrasound at the kitchen island, the image small and gray and impossible, and I stood there with my hand on the marble, feeling the kind of fear that comes dressed as joy. I bought books I barely understood, measured the guest room twice for a nursery, and spent one Saturday assembling a white crib even though the instructions seemed written by a man who hated fathers. Madison laughed that day, really laughed, sitting cross-legged on the rug with a mug of peppermint tea, teasing me because I had one rail upside down. That laugh stayed with me longer than it should have, because after Brandon came back, I heard it less and less. He returned to her life as a friendly face from the past, or that was how she packaged it. A former boyfriend, now a real estate consultant, recently divorced, just helping Patricia evaluate family assets. Helping. People use that word when they want a door opened without admitting what they plan to carry through it. At first, he was only in group messages. Then he was at lunches. Then he was stopping by the mansion to review valuations with Patricia in the library I had restored with my own hands. I would come home from job sites with mud on my boots and sawdust on my coat, and he would be there in a tailored blazer, leaning against the counter, holding a coffee he had not made, smiling like a man visiting a property he planned to list. Madison said I was being unfair. Patricia said I was insecure. Brandon said nothing at first, which was smarter. He let the women do the cutting while he kept his hands clean. Slowly, Madison changed her vocabulary. Our house became the house. My long days became your projects. My caution with money became control. The trust documents I had explained years before became confusing arrangements Ethan handles. She started talking about peace, space, clarity, words that sounded gentle until I realized each one moved me farther from the center of my own life. I would find her standing in the nursery doorway, one hand on her stomach, not looking at the crib but at the room itself, as if calculating what kind of story it would tell once I was removed from it. I tried to speak plainly. I asked if she was unhappy. She said she was tired. I asked if Brandon was becoming a problem. She said I was making her feel watched. I asked if Patricia was pressuring her. She said her mother was only protecting her. That is how the distance grew, not in one dramatic break, but in teaspoons. A canceled dinner. A locked phone. A conversation that stopped when I entered the room. A lawyer's business card tucked between pages of a baby name book. I still remember picking it up and staring at the embossed letters while the house hummed around. Me, warm, expensive, and suddenly unfamiliar. Crane family law. I put the card back exactly where I found it, because by then I had learned that the most important evidence is the kind people think you are too emotional to notice. 2 weeks before Christmas, I heard Patricia in the sunroom with Madison, her voice low but sharp enough to travel through the old vents. He is not like us, sweetheart. He never was. The baby needs stability, not some contractor's pride wrapped in legal tricks. Madison whispered something I could not catch. Then Patricia said the sentence that turned suspicion into certainty. Once he signs, the house stays with you, and Brandon can help us decide what comes next. I stood in the hallway with my hand on the railing I had refinished 7 years earlier, and I felt the old Ethan, the husband who wanted to explain, begin to step backward inside me. In his place came the man who reads every line before he signs, the man who checks the foundation before trusting the paint. I did not confront them that day. I called my attorney from the driveway, watched snow collect on the hood of my truck, and asked him one question. If they try to make me sign inside my own property, how do we let them reveal everything without warning them first? My attorney, Daniel Mercer, did not sound surprised when I called him from the driveway. That was the thing about Daniel. He had been handling my real estate structures for almost 12 years, and his voice never moved faster than the facts. I told him what I had heard in the sunroom. I told him about Brandon, Patricia, Crane family law, the business card in the baby name book, and the way Madison had started using words like stability as if they were stepping stones away from me. Daniel stayed quiet until I finished. Then he said, "Ethan, do not interrupt them. Let them write down exactly what they believe." That sentence became the hinge the whole door swung on. Over the next 2 weeks, I became the easiest man in Vermont to underestimate. I shoveled the front steps. I ordered the Christmas wreaths. I carried boxes of ornaments down from the attic. I drove Madison to her doctor's appointment and waited in the parking lot with the engine running and a paper cup of coffee cooling in my hand. I asked normal questions. How are you feeling? Do you need anything? Should we move the rocking chair closer to the window? She answered with the careful softness people use when they have already left but still need you to hold the door. At night, I would sit in my office above the garage, lights off except for the desk lamp, reviewing documents Daniel sent through the secure portal. Deed history, trust certificate, limited liability company filings, tax receipts, restoration invoices, insurance records, occupancy terms. Every page was a floorboard under my feet. Every signature was a nail holding the truth in place. Daniel had me create a simple timeline, not emotional, not angry, just dates and facts. Date of purchase. Date Caldwell Heritage Trust acquired title. Date Whitmore arrears were paid. Date Patricia moved back into the East Wing. Date Madison and I began using the property as our residence. Date Brandon first requested access to valuation records through Patricia's email. That last one mattered. Brandon was not just circling Madison. He was circling the house. 3 days before Christmas, the mistake came wrapped in perfect arrogance. A draft of the separation packet arrived in the general inbox of Caldwell Property Management because someone in Crane's office copied an old vendor email tied to the mansion account. Daniel called me within 5 minutes. His first words were, "You need to sit down." I did not. I stood by the window of my office and looked across the frozen lawn while he explained what they had drafted. They wanted me to acknowledge Madison as the continuing resident of the marital home. They wanted me to vacate by midnight on Christmas Eve. They wanted me to agree not to interfere with future sale, refinance, or transfer discussions involving the property. It was written as if the house were a pie already cut, and I was a guest asking for crumbs. I asked Daniel if the document had any power over the trust. He gave a small laugh. The kind lawyers only allow themselves when someone else has made a very expensive assumption. None whatsoever, he said. But if they sign their version first, they will have put their intent in writing. So we let them. That was the plan. Not revenge the way people imagine it. Not yelling. Not drama. Not tearing a family apart under Christmas lights. Just patience. Clean paper. Clean timing. Daniel prepared a red envelope for me to place under the tree before dinner. Inside were certified copies of the deed, the trust certificate, the operating agreement for the limited liability company, proof of tax payments, and a notice terminating Patricia's informal occupancy of the East Wing after the legal grace period. He also arranged to be available by video call at 9 o'clock that night, because Daniel believed timing was not about surprise. It was about control. On Christmas Eve, while Madison dressed upstairs and Patricia supervised flowers in the foyer like a general arranging flags, I walked into the parlor alone and slid that red envelope beneath the lowest branch of the tree. The lights reflected off the paper, small and calm and patient. For the first time in weeks, I felt no urge to warn anyone. They had built the stage. They had invited the audience. All I had to do was let them finish their performance. By the time my memory returned to the dining room, the laughter had become thinner. It was still there, but now it had to work for every breath. Patricia looked at Mr. Crane, waiting for him to make my question disappear. He opened his folder, scanned the first page, then the second, then glanced toward Madison with the expression of a man who had just found a loose board under polished carpet. Brandon saw it too. His confidence shifted, only an inch, but enough. Men like Brandon live on inches. They know when a room starts moving away from them. Patricia straightened her shoulders. "This is absurd," she said. "Whitmore House has been in my family for generations. I have hosted governors here. My daughter grew up here. Your little paperwork games do not change blood." I let that sentence sit. Blood. People reach for that word when the records are not on their side. I looked at Madison, but she was staring at the signed papers as if they had started speaking a language she could not understand. "Ethan," she whispered, "what are you doing?" I answered her gently, because part of me still remembered the woman on the nursery rug laughing over crib screws. "I am asking everyone in this room to slow down and read before they celebrate." Patricia gave a sharp little laugh. "Read what? Some contractor receipt? A tax bill?" Brandon stepped forward then, too eager, trying to patch the moment before it widened. "Ethan, nobody is saying you did not help. You put work into the place. We all appreciate that. But sweat equity does not make you the owner of a family estate." I looked at his polished shoes on my dining room floor and almost admired how easily he said we. That one syllable told me everything Daniel needed confirmed. Brandon was not supporting Madison through a separation. He was already placing himself inside the next chapter. I pushed back my chair. The legs made a quiet sound against the hardwood, not loud, but final enough that everyone stopped pretending to eat. I walked to the tree. The room followed me with its eyes. The ornaments trembled slightly when I reached beneath the lowest branch and removed the red envelope Daniel had prepared. It looked almost festive in my hand. Thick paper, clean edges, sealed with nothing but patience. Patricia rolled her eyes, but she did not laugh this time. I returned to the table and placed the envelope in the center, right beside the packet Madison had signed. 2 documents. 2 stories. One of them had facts. I opened it slowly. Not for drama. For clarity. First, I placed the certified deed on the table, turning it so Mr. Crane could read it. Then the certificate of trust. Then the operating agreement for Caldwell Heritage Holdings, Limited Liability Company. Then 7 years of property tax payments. Then the restoration invoices, insurance records, and bank satisfaction letter. Paper by paper, the room lost color. Mr. Crane picked up the deed first. His mouth tightened. He read the owner of record once, then again, as if repetition might produce a better client. Patricia reached for the document, but he lifted one hand without looking at her. A small gesture. Professional. Devastating. Brandon cleared his throat. "This does not mean what you think it means." Daniel Mercer's face appeared on my phone before he finished the sentence. I had already tapped the video call. Daniel sat in his office wearing a dark suit and the calm expression of a man who charged by the hour because panic was for amateurs. "Mr. Crane," Daniel said, "good evening. I understand my client is being asked to vacate a property held by Caldwell Heritage Trust through Caldwell Heritage Holdings, Limited Liability Company." Mr. Crane's face changed again. Not fear. Recognition. That was worse. He knew Daniel. Or at least he knew the kind of paperwork Daniel built. Patricia's voice cut through the silence. "Madison, say something. Tell him this house is ours." Madison looked at me then, eyes wet for a different reason now. "Is this true?" she asked. I did not raise my voice. I did not enjoy it the way they had enjoyed my silence. I only nodded toward the papers. "It has been true since before the first Christmas tree went up in this foyer. The candles kept burning. The snow kept falling. And for the first time all night, nobody laughed." The silence after Daniel spoke was not empty. It was crowded with every assumption they had carried into that room. Patricia's face lost the bright confidence she had worn all evening, but she fought to keep the shape of it. "That is impossible," she said, though her voice had stopped sounding like a verdict and started sounding like a prayer. Mr. Crane did not answer her right away. He was reading the deed again, then the trust certificate, then the operating agreement, each page turning heavier in his hands. Daniel's voice came through my phone, calm and clear. "For the record, The property commonly known as Whitmore House is not titled to Mrs. Madison Caldwell, Patricia Whitmore, or any Whitmore family entity. The owner of record is Caldwell Heritage Holdings, Limited Liability Company, held by Caldwell Heritage Trust. My client is the controlling trustee. Brandon's mouth opened, then closed. He had the look of a man watching a bridge vanish after he had already stepped onto it. Patricia reached for the back of a chair to steady herself, not because she was weak, but because pride needs furniture when facts take the floor out from under it. Madison pressed both hands around the curve of her stomach and stared at me like I had become a stranger inside a house she finally understood. "You never told me," she said. The words were soft, wounded, almost believable. I looked at her and felt the old reflex rise, the one that wanted to comfort her before I questioned her. Then I remembered the paper she had signed. I remembered midnight. I remembered the hotel room they had arranged for me off Route 9 like a man could be boxed and labeled if the ribbon was polite enough. "I did tell you, Madison. 7 years ago, in Daniel's office. You said the structure was boring and asked me to just handle it." Color touched her cheeks, then disappeared. Patricia cut in quickly. "She was pregnant, emotional, pressured by you for years. Do not twist this." Daniel did not raise his voice. "Mrs. Whitmore, the purchase occurred long before the pregnancy. The trust documents bear Mrs. Caldwell's acknowledgement as spouse at the time of residence planning. The acknowledgement did not grant ownership, but it confirmed she was informed of the structure." Mr. Crane's eyes closed for half a second. That was the first honest thing he had done all night. Brandon stepped back from Madison's chair. Just one step, but everyone saw it. Madison saw it most of all. Her hand lowered from her stomach to the table. "Brandon," she whispered. He forced a smile that did not reach his eyes. "This is just a legal technicality." Daniel answered before I could. "It is not. The signed document your counsel prepared attempts to establish residence and future control over an asset your party does not own. Depending on intent, that creates significant problems." The word problems moved around the room like cold air under a door. Patricia looked at Mr. Crane. "Fix this." He set the deed down carefully. "I need to review all documents before advising further," he said. Translation: he could not fix what had never belonged to her. I turned to Brandon then. "For weeks, you requested valuation data through Patricia's email. You asked about refinancing options, sale timing, and whether a private buyer could close before spring." His face tightened. "I consult on property. That is my work." I nodded. "Then you will understand why Daniel sent copies of those requests to my office and why they will be included in the divorce record." Madison turned toward him fully now. "Sale timing?" Brandon's silence finally did what my words could not. It crossed the room and sat down beside her. She looked at him, then at her mother, then at the paper she had signed with tears in her eyes less than 10 minutes earlier. The tears came back, but this time they were not part of the performance. Patricia's voice sharpened. "Madison, do not fall for this. He is trying to isolate you." I almost laughed, but not because anything was funny. She had gathered a dinner table against me, invited a former boyfriend into my home, brought a lawyer to Christmas Eve, handed me eviction terms beside the turkey, and still found a way to call me the one doing the isolating. I picked up the separation packet and placed it beside Daniel's documents. "You signed first," I said to Madison. I wanted everyone to see that. I wanted the room to understand this was not confusion. This was intent. Her lips parted, but no answer came. Outside, the snow thickened against the windows. Inside, the mansion stood warm and bright, and no longer useful to their lie. Patricia reached for her champagne, then seemed to remember nobody was celebrating anymore. Brandon stared at the floor. Mr. Crane packed his folder with the careful movements of a man trying not to become part of someone else's disaster. And Madison sat in the candlelight, one hand on the document, finally understanding that the house she used to push me out had been holding my name in its walls the entire time. The first person to leave the table was Brandon. He did not announce it. Men like him only make speeches when they think the room belongs to them. Once it does not, they become very interested in their phones. He murmured something about giving the family space, picked up his coat from the back of a chair, and walked toward the foyer without looking at Madison. She watched him go with a stillness I recognized. It was the same stillness I had felt when I first saw Crane's card in the baby name book. The moment your mind stops arguing because the truth has finally become too heavy to lift. Patricia called after him once, sharp and embarrassed, but he did not turn around. The front door opened, cold air rolled through the hall, and then it closed with a sound softer than justice, but close enough for me. Mr. Crane left next. He told Patricia he would be in contact after reviewing the documents. That was a lawyer's way of saying the evening had ended badly, and he did not want fingerprints on the rest of it. Patricia stood beside the table, surrounded by candles and untouched dessert, looking smaller than a woman in diamonds should be able to look. She wanted to say something cruel. I could see it forming. But every insult now had to climb over the deed. The trust, the tax records, the emails, and Daniel Mercer still waiting calmly on my phone screen. Finally, she said, "You have ruined Christmas." I looked around the room at the papers, the nervous relatives, my wife's wet eyes, the house I had rebuilt so her family could keep pretending history was the same as honor. "No, Patricia," I said. "I only stopped pretending with you." Daniel cleared his throat and brought us back to earth. "Ethan, I recommend ending this gathering and preserving all signed materials." I nodded, thanked him, and ended the call. Then I did the one thing nobody expected. I turned to Madison and said, "You are not leaving tonight." Patricia's head snapped up. Madison blinked. I kept my voice steady. "You are pregnant. It is snowing. The roads are bad. You can stay in the guest wing until your doctor confirms a safe arrangement. And after that, our attorneys can set temporary terms." Her face crumpled, not dramatically, not like before, but like a person finally hearing kindness after spending the night proving she did not deserve it. "Ethan," she whispered, "I made a mistake. I wanted that sentence to heal something. I really did. But some words arrive after the house has already burned down inside you." I gathered the signed packet, the red envelope, and Daniel's documents into one folder. "No, Madison. A mistake is missing a turn in a snowstorm. This was a plan." She lowered her eyes, and I hated that the sight still hurt me. I told her I would cover medical care connected to the pregnancy, that I would not argue through relatives, and that any questions about custody, support, or paternity would go through proper legal channels with dignity. Not punishment, not revenge. Rules, boundaries, the things I should have built around my heart long before I built them around my properties. By midnight, the mansion was quiet. Patricia had retreated to the East Wing, though she now understood that even retreat had an expiration date. Madison was upstairs behind a closed guest room door. The relatives were gone, their tire tracks already softening under new snow. I stood alone in the dining room, blowing out candles one by one. Each flame vanished with a small thread of smoke, and with every darkened wick, the house felt less like a battlefield and more like mine again. In the foyer, the Christmas tree still glowed. Red, gold, white. Patient lights over polished wood. I thought about the man I had been at dinner, the one they expected to beg, and the man I had become by dessert, the one who could offer mercy without surrendering the truth. That night, I did not lose a family. I lost the illusion that everyone sitting at your table belongs there. The mansion stayed. The documents stayed. My name stayed in the walls. And for the first time in years, when the snow fell over that long private road, Whitmore House was not pretending to be theirs anymore.